My name is Katie Yates, and this is the final episode of Take Aim, Season 4 of the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife's podcast, Fishing Game Changers. In this series, I've spoken with Mainers of different backgrounds to learn about their first steps into hunting. Last season, I chatted with University of Maine entomologist Judy Collins, who first became interested in hunting after participating in the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program. After taking a hunting workshop, led by registered Maine guide and director of the University of Maine 4-H camp and learning centers at Bryant Pond and Greenland Point, Ron Fournier, Judy hired Ron as a guide, but also as a mentor, and started on a rewarding journey learning to hunt. On a windy day earlier this month in October, I met with Ron outside the department's Augusta headquarters to talk about his experiences as a guide, mentor, and outdoor educator.
My name is Ron Fournier, and I'm the director of the Bryant Pond 4-H Camp and Learning Center, as well as the director of the Greenland Point Learning Center in Princeton, Maine. I am also the proprietor of Orion Outfitters and Guide Service in Mason Township.
I don't think that there's a typical day for you, but what does maybe that entail?
There's never a typical day, and that's actually what I enjoy professionally. So in my role of a director, I spend a lot of time leading a staff primarily at Bryant Pond, where we focus on youth education, working with schools, summer camps, and various trainings and things like the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program. And then my activities as a Maine guide typically are in the fall. I do thread some fishing trips in there. And that really is meeting different clients from, various walks of life to kind of meet and exceed their expectations, getting them outdoors and connecting to things that I'm really passionate about. And I think that's what keeps me so engaged, is I can live both sides of my life between guiding and also leading the 4-H camp, and both sides complement each other. So I know when I'm at camp, I'm always drawing on my guiding activities and experiences and sharing those stories with kids and adults. And then through camp and just all the affiliations with Bryant Pond, I'm constantly talking about what we do with kids in the outdoors and families. And then we actually see a lot of my clients sharing that information with their families. And I've got now clients with their kids coming to summer camp. So it's kind of a win-win.
What kind of skills do you teach kids at summer camp?
At camp, we cover a really wide array of skills, mostly focused on conservation education and ecology. So we know that we have some kids that are interested in hunting and fishing and things like that. And then there's kids that come from families that they just don't pursue those opportunities. They're into hiking or canoeing, backpacking. So we teach skills, I guess at an entry level, would be just getting outdoors and being comfortable, and that sense of awareness, the appreciation for walking in the woods and making little discoveries along the way. And every time I go in to teach a lesson, it's completely organic and spontaneous. I may have a goal to teach one thing, and suddenly we find a salamander, and we're talking about salamanders and amphibians and how certain parts of the ecosystem or environment are really important to that. I like teaching in that way. It's never the same way twice. And I'm always learning from the kids and their little discoveries as well. We definitely focus a lot of energy on conservation ed and getting folks interested in hunting or the skills that will allow them to be successful in the outdoors. Things like personal preparedness, map and compass, various shooting sports, things like that.
How many kids go through that program?
So a typical week of summer camp, I would say we average around 100 to 120 campers a week, and we do 9 weeks of summer camp. But I would say a typical week of lakeside classroom programming with schools could be up over 100 to 120.
And you also do the BOW program?
Yep, the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program. It's been a kind of a staple of our calendar. We started, I would say about 10 years ago with the fall skills weekend. And then from there we built the winter skills weekend in February. And now we've got a few one-day programs, which we kind of call the BOW Mini. And that's really, to me, that's really empowering to work with adults, work with some folks that may be apprehensive about the outdoors or want to learn a completely new skill. So they're showing some vulnerability, and at the end, seeing the success in their eyes and then hearing their feedback, it really keeps me in the game and keeps me continually excited about reaching more and more people. So
I'm sure a lot of people are wondering where you get your energy.
Lots of coffee.
As you're drinking coffee.
That's not untrue, and I don't sleep a lot. I don't know. I think I drive my wife crazy because my head spins a little bit faster than I think other people. Certainly running the 4-H camp, there's so many things that change all day, every day, and you have to be able to adapt. And I think that for somebody that thinks in a very linear way, it's challenging because you have to be able to shift gears and not lose the momentum on anything that you have to set aside for a moment. And I think with guiding, that's kind of very similar, is you have to be in the moment and constantly, have a lot of balls in the air at the same time. So.
I would say it doesn't need to be said, but you are a very passionate outdoors person.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing. I came from 20 years in a machine shop, and it's a big long story, but I made a deliberate point to change my life and to walk away from the comforts of a nice house and a little cul-de-sac with everything that we needed and 2 fairly new vehicles in the driveway, and we set all that aside to come to our piece of land in Maine and just kind of start over. And it allowed me to hit the reset on my own life, and I think that that's where a lot of that passion comes from, is I had that opportunity. It was scary, and there was a lot of time where the money wasn't there and we had to struggle, but that just gave me even more fire in my eyes to just keep moving forward. And then to see it through my children and how those life skills, I guess, have kind of played out as they're now all adults. And then looking back at the sense of adventure, like you can lead a pretty comfortable life and be happy, I guess. But when you look at what you did in the time that you were here, in the sense of adventure, in the story, I keep saying to myself, it's all about the story. What is the story you're going to tell towards the end? And I didn't want it to be a boring story.
So how does this energetic, passionate outdoors person get into hunting in the first place? Like some of the folks I've interviewed for this series, Ron was introduced at a young age.
Growing up, I grew up in a little mill town in northern Massachusetts, and I was kind of feral. I basically, my mom would just kick me out the door in the morning, and I'd come back for dinner, and I was always out playing in the stream or in the woods and making discoveries. And I feel like a lot of kids in my generation did that you came home when the streetlights came on, and there was adventure around every corner, and that's how you learn and you get really connected to nature. And I had the luxury of having a big farm and a huge forest near our house, so not everybody had that. And growing up, my father would take me fishing, and I really enjoyed that. I remember my very first fishing trip very clearly, vividly. I remember things that he said and things that we caught and things like that. But it was just the time that he invested in getting me outdoors and fishing. But he was never really into hunting. When I was around 11 or 12 years old, my uncle asked me if I wanted to go duck hunting. He took me kind of under his wing and started to shoot a shotgun and then get outdoors, learning about waterfowl and just getting ready for my first duck hunt. And I remember the first morning going out, in the dark, putting decoys out and sitting there listening to the lake just come alive, and then the first flight of birds that came in and taking shots at ducks coming in. It changed my life. It literally in that moment changed my life forever. It really did. And then I didn't recognize it in the moment, but I looked back on that moment very fondly, that it just took a little bit of time and energy from him to invest in me. And again, that moment was a big part of it. But then every weekend we started duck hunting, and then I slowly got into deer hunting. And it wasn't too long before I was actually showing him places to put deer stands and whatnot. And he was very receptive to that, supported me along the way. And then I remember probably around 14, 15 years old, I shot my first deer. And that was it. I felt like I was self-made, and I've never looked back.
Are there any experiences that you have now that feel new, or are the first time that you're trying to do something? I mean, after a while, are there new experiences that you can have as a hunter?
Yeah, Katie, that's a really good question. I think with hunting, there's a lot of ways that you can kind of renew your enthusiasm, and you could switch over to start using a bow or a crossbow. There's just so many opportunities, and I find it can also be cyclical. Again, we live in a state where you can be outdoorsy and recreate hunting and fishing year round, literally. And the opportunities are endless.
Do you think that mentoring and teaching people is something that helps you stay excited about it?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I find way more enjoyment nowadays in helping others to success than I do myself. And that's why I think I got into guiding. I so much would rather see somebody trusting me in my guidance and judgment. And then when we are successful, and success doesn't mean just killing an animal. It means having a good hunt, having a good experience. When you're getting somebody started, it's easy to get hung up on the success. It's easy to get hung up on the shot. If you've got a young hunter with you or somebody brand new and you didn't see a deer, you didn't see a turkey, that's not failure. And you should be equally as excited about that moment. And the little things like stopping at Dunkin' Donuts on the way home and getting a hot chocolate and just sharing stories on the tailgate, those little pieces that make up the bigger whole are so crucial. I listened to my daughter talking about when I took her out when she was 6, 7 years old. She loved to hunt because she knew that every time we came out of the woods, we were going to get a donut and a hot chocolate, and it wasn't whether or not she shot something.
That little detail of getting hot cocoa and donuts with his daughter, it's so nice to hear. And I've heard something similar dozens of times throughout the course of making this series. The hunting memories people tend to share are not a trophy harvest, but those little things where you're connecting with a loved one or even a friend. Judy from last week's episode didn't have a hunter to learn from until she met Ron. It was not the traditional route for learning to hunt, but sometimes you have to think outside the box. What is some advice that you could give to someone out there who is a lifelong hunter? How can they pass on those skills? And, I think a lot of people don't necessarily think outside the box. They think traditionally kids, grandkids, but it could mean your neighbor, it could mean your coworker, it could mean a friend.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that we do tend to get hung up on youth, and we think that we always need to bring out a young person to get somebody started. And we absolutely do, but there are so many other folks that we're looking at college grads, we're looking at the neighbor next door, like you said, or a coworker that might have a little bit of interest, but as adults, let's face it, we're less likely to show vulnerability, to say we don't know how to do something. And all it takes is for that one person to say, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, I'm going to mow the lawn and, do this or that. How about we go bird hunting? How about we try going to the range and doing some target shooting? And you might actually get that person involved, and it doesn't matter what age they are. And if they've got kids, all the better. Because if you get the parent, you're going to get the kids. But if you get the kids, it's a hard sell to get that parent if the parent is not into whatever that activity is. Mm-hmm. So we really need to look at that, from the big picture standpoint. But there's so many folks out there that are maybe have hunted for years. Maybe they've gotten out of it. Maybe their hunting partner was a child. Their own kids have grown up and moved away. There's still that passion in there somewhere, and you might have to dust it off. But all of a sudden, when you introduce that new person, could be your best friend you never thought of, you're back in the game, and all of a sudden you're now almost starting over, and you can see all that energy. And again, that's a big part of why we do what we do.
So I think that's a good point too, that there may be a misconception guiding is, so someone who hires a guide is already an avid hunter. That doesn't necessarily need to be true. People who are newbies or novices or even just curious can hire a guide.
Yeah, absolutely.
And have a good experience and learn.
Yeah, I would strongly suggest if somebody's just getting into it that they should hire a guide, because one thing, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to ask questions, but you're going to learn a lot. And if you hire the right guide, they're really going to steer you in the right direction. For somebody coming in brand new, first of all, if they're willing to make that call and then show up, I think there's maybe a little bit of anxiety of, I'm going to be the only person there that doesn't know, which end of the gun to hold or whatnot. But you might very well get that person, get them started. That might be a client and soon a friend of yours for many, many, many years. And they're going to have these experiences, and when they leave, they're going to rave about it. They're going to go back to wherever they go, back to work or their family. They're going to share photos on Facebook, and they're going to talk about, you guiding them along, being patient with them, and teaching them skills. And when you're guiding, let's say it's a deer hunt. The deer hunting part is, it's a part of it, but it's also looking at the mountains as you're driving down the country road, going to your deer stand, or watching the sunset, or sharing a meal around the wood stove. It's all those mini experiences that just make it amazing.
This series was made in the midst of a global pandemic. So thank you for dealing with all of the wind and traffic sounds in the background of each interview. I recorded them from a picnic table outside my office. Throughout our conversation, Ron and I can't help but examine the renewed interest in raising, growing, and sourcing your own food when faced with empty grocery store shelves. Due to widespread closures and shutdowns of businesses or gatherings, people have flocked to trailheads and embraced outdoor experiences. That's at least one positive thing that's come from all this. From Ron's perspective, it's a refresh, a little reset, and has inspired a new sense of appreciation for the outdoors and community. But Ron has some words of wisdom for newbies entering the outdoor space for the first time.
This whole pandemic has given us a chance to really take a good hard look at ourselves, and I see a lot of people asking questions about, and it's not just hunting and fishing, but it's also how to, raise things in your own backyard. So, and to me, that's really exciting. We're seeing a lot of people that are gardening, and you couldn't find seeds this year at Agway. I mean, people were just buying seeds and starting gardens all over the place, and I'd love to see that continue.
We can't be dependent on some of our modern systems. The grocery store is not something we can rely on.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good example. So if there's a gain in self-reliance through all of this, I think that's great. We have to be resilient, we have to be gritty, and we have to be able to provide for ourselves. So, within season, you can hunt for lots of different species. There's way more out there than just deer and wild turkey to eat too. There's a lot of wild game that is nutritious and very good table fare. To me, it feels like we're setting the clock back, to the 1940s, 1950s, where people just did that. You raised a garden, you raised animals, you knew where your food was coming from, and then you hit the back field or the forest to supplement what you could grow or raise. And then the other side of that is sharing with your neighbors. If you've got a neighbor that doesn't hunt or fish, share that with them. Maybe they're the ones that have the best tomatoes in the neighborhood. So share some of your catch or your harvest with them, and it builds community. And I know every time we have a meal around my kitchen table with something that we provided, it's just that much more special.
Yeah, that's great. I also think, though, it's important if somebody is thinking about going out hunting and fishing maybe for the first time, that there's some basic skills that they should probably have. So to understand leave no trace, and to have the basics of safety and map and compass.
Yeah, the basics, I think we can't overlook the basics. First and foremost is getting yourself into the woods or on the water and back out safely. That's key. And there's things that, simple mistakes like knowing how to make a fire. And then some other basic skills, if you're going to get into hunting, you also need to know what you would do if you were successful. If you shot a deer, do you know how to field dress it? Do you know how to take that animal and get it to the tagging station and get it, butchered properly? And if you don't have those skills, then you're going to set yourself up for some problems. So, and there's lots of new ways to get these resources and skills.
Some of the ways you can get these skills is by clicking around the department's website. Visit mefishwildlife.com to learn more about recreation opportunities in Maine, our management practices for game and non-game species, to learn more about taking your hunter safety class, and to explore some of the many educational opportunities, such as the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program and the youth programs mentioned by Ron in this episode. After a little break, I'll be back with another season of Fishing Game Changers, this time focused on the diverse work of our staff as I join them in the field, or the office, or wherever it is that they work. To learn more about this podcast, visit mefishwildlife.com/changers. To stay up to date on current episodes, hit subscribe on your favorite listening app. If that happens to be the Apple Podcast app, give us a rating and let us know what you think. In the meantime, share your outdoor experiences with us on social media. I'll be on the lookout. Tag the department on Instagram with @mefishwildlife. And if you happen to go hunting, use the hashtag HuntME.